Is it just me, or are the Shapiros way too concerned about other people's wombs? Hi, and welcome to, or back to, my channel. I'm Kit, and today we're going to talk about Ben Shapiro's bold statement that, yes, you should have children. For those of you somehow unfamiliar with Ben, he is a conservative political commentator and master of the art of the Gish Gallop. And I just found out one of my cousins follows him on Instagram. Along with all the Trumps, Team Trump, Matt Walsh, Project Veritas, Blair White, Fox News, I am an island. Right. So, Ben, he also founded the Daily Wire, where you can find more conservative commentators like Candace Owens, Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh, and so on. Recently, there was a bit of a kerfluffle with Chelsea Handler, a comedian, daring to be childless and happy about it as she approaches 50. Ben, as well as other conservatives, had a bit to say about that topic, and that is how we ended up here with a video titled, "Yes, You Should Have Kids. Voluntary Childlessness is Bad." Those conservatives, for all their talk about freedom and small government, they sure do care about the intimate details of people's personal lives. Anyway, let's get into it.
So we have a follow-up from our good friend Chelsea Handler. So Chelsea Handler is angry that people were making fun of her for a really bad comedy video that she dropped on Valentine's Day. It was a comedy video in which she explained how wonderful it was to be a single alcoholic woman who smokes a lot of pot. And she talked about how it was great to be childless. She was the happiest person who was childless, she said, through her very obvious tears.
Why do I get the feeling that Ben is exaggerating, if not outright lying?
And she made this issue the issue, right? None of us were talking about Chelsea Handler and her decisions not to have kids because, frankly, no one cared. And you decided to make it front and center.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't she post something about a day in the life of a child-free woman and conservatives went a bit crazy? It was all over Twitter for a day or two, and by Ben's own admission, this is his second video about it. And he would go on to make a third because, of course. First, there's Chelsea Handler is the saddest woman in the world, published on February 14th. Then there's this one, which caught my attention because, yes, you should have kids, voluntary childlessness is bad, is quite a title, and it was published on February 15th. And finally, my response to Chelsea Handler's newest attacks on February 16th. Who is it that has the problem, Ben? He could have ignored her video. Per him, he doesn't find Chelsea Handler funny. Anyway, that's not what this video is about. I'm here to learn why I should have kids.
Well, this drove her on the set of The Daily Show yesterday. The Daily Show is just getting unfunnier and unfunnier. I mean, like they've now reached a comedy vacuum. There is no actual physical matter in this comedy space for The Daily Show. It's just a complete vacuum.
So then, why do you watch it?
And nature abhors a vacuum, so apparently they've put Chelsea Handler there or something. So Chelsea Handler had another monologue about how happy she is. She's so happy, you guys. She's so happy. She's the happiest person. Why are you calling her sad and a wine lady? Why are you? She's so happy. There we go.
I would like to extend my thanks to Ben because I am definitely grabbing one of those faces for the thumbnail.
One thing that I have made abundantly clear is that I do not want children. I say it on stage. I say it in interviews. It's the first thing I say to myself in the mirror when I wake up each morning, right before I tell myself, God, you're a dynamic woman. Kids don't respect me, and quite frankly, the feeling is mutual. And the fact is, there are millions of women just like me, but for some reason, every single one of us at some point in our lives is shamed by society for not wanting a baby. These Fox News trolls are right about one thing. I am miserable. In fact, I was just scrolling through my Instagram feed the other day, realizing how miserable I am. I'm miserable on the beach, and then here I am miserable on the top of a mountain, and then here I am miserable scuba diving, and then I'm miserable again smoking a joint in a hot tub.
I mean, she's not wrong. If you're a woman and you've never been asked about when you're having kids, please do let me know. I said I wasn't having kids at 12 and people still kept assuming that I would change my mind when I was older. And this notion that you can only be fulfilled and happy with children, I'm scripting as I watch the video for the first time, but I would be willing to bet that is where Ben goes with this. And possibly something about society. And on that note, this also prompted an article from Real Femme Sapien about the spinster to elder abuse pipeline, and yes, we're going to segue a bit. RFS writes, as it stands right now, the life expectancy in the United States sits at 71.1 years old. Life expectancy is declining as new morbidities appear without medicine having yet caught up to them. Despite this, we must be mindful that medical technology will continue to advance in the coming decades, and many of us may live as long as 90 or more years. In consideration of this, women must structure their lives differently than men in accordance with our fertile window. By age 30, 90% of a woman's eggs have perished. This makes pregnancy by age 35 and beyond obsolete to many women. Considering medical advancements that have yet to come, if a woman decides in her youth to be childless by 35, she has her remaining 55 years left to live without purpose, legacy, or familial elderly care. That is the majority of her life, not the minority. Decisions made in a short window from 18 to 35, 17 years, will permanently alter the remaining course of a woman's life. There is a darker side to the boss babe fallacy propagated by Western progressivists and feminists in leading a life independent of men and children. I believe there will be a wave of elderly women flooding nursing homes at the tail end of our century because they did not invest appropriately financially, temporally, and romantically into portfolios and/or families. My suspicion of their lack of ability to exercise foresight in life planning would be because we live in an era where our culture prioritizes protecting a woman's feelings versus actively helping her problem solve. After all, the psychological weight of said problems can be too heavy for a woman's emotionality to bear. Therefore, we should deny its existence. How impractical. This influx of women pushed into elder care facilities staffed by subpar caregivers with low educational requirements who are compensated with minimal pay will leave many single and childless women vulnerable to elder abuse. The rest is behind a paywall, but I think we get the gist. I'm a bit confused as to why RFS thinks women need to structure their lives differently from men, because men also have a fertile window, and as they age, they will also become frail and in need of assistance. Or is that okay because though it becomes more difficult and the risk of birth defects increases, a man can theoretically become a father at 60? Which, of course, begs the question, is it really fair to potentially saddle a 20-year-old with the care of their 80-year-old father? To have a father too old to play and keep up with a toddler? To potentially leave a 10-year-old fatherless because the father has died? RFS herself married a much older man, so unless she plans to marry again after his passing, what was that about romantically investing? Now, I understand she's pregnant and likely plans to have more kids, but that is no guarantee. And really, you should have kids because you actually want kids, not because you think they'll take care of you when you're old. All of my great-grandmothers outlived my great-grandfathers. They all, obviously, had kids. All but one of them ended up in a nursing home, even the one that had 10 children. Being a caregiver is not easy, and RFS is absolutely right that elderly care workers should be paid more. Also, my great-grandmother passed at 108. My grandmother, her only child, was 81. Your kids will also get old and be unable to care for you at some point, even if they're willing. Granted, most people won't live that long, but it's still something to consider. You should not have a child or get married on the basis of they'll be there for me when I'm old. There are no guarantees. Also, Western progressivists and feminists don't say don't marry or have children. They say only marry or have children because you want to, not because society says you must. And as for this notion that society coddles women because our emotions can't handle truth, sure, Jan. Anyway, back to Ben.
She's going to tell you how not miserable she is. Does she look like a happy person to you?
I think he's looking for a no, but I would say yes. She also seems amused by the kerfluffle she's caused. Hey, that's an idea. Maybe if I do a day in the life of a child-free woman, I too can go viral and get famous. My life isn't very interesting, though.
You seem like a very, very happy person. She's so overjoyed. Okay, so here's the thing. Whether she chooses to have kids or not, frankly, I don't care. What I do care about is that society actually should favor the choice to have kids over the choice not to have kids. It's very important that people have kids. It makes them better people, obviously. I don't think Chelsea Handler is anybody's idea of a saint.
Abby has said the same thing, that having children makes you a better person, and I would love to hear some examples from these two about how having children made them better people, because though I'm sure Chelsea Handler is no saint, I wouldn't say any Shapiro is either. And we already have a lot of tales of parents behaving badly, dangerously, selfishly, murderously, to know that that idea is nonsense.
But beyond the individual fulfillment that comes from having children, a society that is not built around the future generation is a selfish and stupid society, and that is precisely what we've constructed for ourselves. Not only that, it is a society that is demographically doomed to destruction. And so when you change the norm from it is good to have kids.
Except it was never, it is good to have kids. It was, there's no reliable birth control, so unless you plan to be celibate, kids are inevitable. And I think it's much better, for society and for the kids in question, for kids to be born because they're wanted, not because there's no choice.
We're utterly indifferent as to whether people have kids.
You should be indifferent as to whether or not other people have kids. It's not your business, and you have no say in it. It's so weird how we have to keep telling this to the party of freedom.
What you end up with is a dying civilization. And that is precisely what we are seeing today. There is a Pew Research Center poll from November of 2021, and it shows a growing share of childless adults in the United States don't expect to ever have children. Quote, a new Pew Research Center survey finds that a rising share of U.S. adults who are not already parents say they're unlikely to ever have children. Their reasons range from just not wanting to have kids to concerns about climate change and the environment. So, I mean, this would be the giveaway. Who doesn't want to have kids? Lefties. That is the giveaway. Because the reason, if you're not having kids because you're worried that it's going to be hotter in 100 years than it is today, let me explain to you the vast span of human history when temperatures change fairly radically.
This is the same man who said that if Florida ended up underwater because of climate change, Floridians could sell their houses. The Shapiros fancy themselves as intellectuals, but they say the stupidest shit.
And also, when we have air conditioning and people can expect to live 8 decades. I mean, like, to pretend that your kids are in some innately greater danger because of gradual changing of the climate over the course of a century, and so you shouldn't have the kids, is insane. It's totally crazy.
I think Ben says a lot for the money, and I also think this is one of those things. Maybe it's just me, but I can hear the insincerity in his voice. But anyway, air conditioning is just a band-aid, and also one that makes the problem worse. What about water? What about food? What about more extreme and more frequent natural disasters? What about the fact that the world's population is still increasing and predicted to continue doing so for decades to come? Let's be honest, they're not worried about the population. They're worried about who is having kids. And honestly, if Ben thinks it's insane and crazy to be worried about the future you would be leaving to your kids, you should be grateful that people who worry about those things aren't having kids then, because they're crazy and insane.
And then there are the people who just say they don't want to have kids because obviously they want to be like Chelsea Handler and be able to take Instagram photos of themselves for the pleasure of strangers smoking a joint in a hot tub. And apparently this is how you find fulfillment and true meaning in your life. As you get topless into a jacuzzi, the way that Chelsea Handler would, and you smoke a joint and you put it on your Instagram and then randos cheer for you. And it makes you feel really good for a second before you drink a bleep load of wine, as I said yesterday, and then fall asleep on your couch while drooling into your cat's fur.
It's weird, but I don't have kids and I still don't get drunk or smoke joints. I don't really enjoy either, so I don't do them. There's many ways to live life, Ben. It's not have kids or spend your nights drinking.
According to Pew Research, some 44% of non-parents aged 18 to 49 say it's not too or not at all likely that they will have children someday. That's an increase of 7 percentage points from the 37% who said the same in a 2018 survey. Meanwhile, 74% of adults younger than 50 who are already parents say they are unlikely to have more kids, virtually unchanged since 2018. So what does this mean for society? Well, it means that we're going to go bankrupt. I mean, let's say that you're a big fan of the social welfare state.
The U.S. does not have a social welfare state, and you should not be having kids to provide future taxpayers. How they don't see that as dystopian is beyond me.
Well, congratulations on having trashed the entire pyramid scheme that you guys rely upon, the demographic pyramid scheme.
Who is the you guys he's referring to?
One of the things that is very obvious is that countries that enter demographic decline because of a values change have a very tough time reversing that demographic decline. There's an article in the New York Times from Andrew Jacobs and Francesca Paris titled, "Can China Reverse Its Population Decline? Just Ask Sweden." And they point out that China's population has now begun to decline. And they say even places that have not begun to lose population yet, like Australia, France, and Britain, have been grappling with demographic decline for years as life expectancy increases and women have fewer children. History suggests that once a country crosses the threshold of negative population growth, there is little its government can do to reverse it. As a country's population grows more top-heavy, a smaller, younger generation bears the increasing cost of caring for a larger, older one.
I guess we might want to rethink how we do things. Though, seriously, what is the goal here? To scare people into having kids? I know conservatives think people who don't have kids are just living high on the hog, footloose and fancy-free, but in addition to the worry about climate change, there's also a lot of worry about the cost. The social welfare state in the US is a joke. And when I grew up, I heard a lot of don't breed them if you can't feed them, and I doubt I'm the only one who remembers that. And if you happen to forget, the internet is more than happy to remind you about the lack of sympathy for anyone who falls on hard times.
So it turns out that there are, in fact, societal consequences to a cultural shift from caring about the future and having kids.
What about the people who care about the future and about kids and thus don't have kids? Why is the assumption always, if you care about children, you'll have them?
to not caring about the future and not having kids.
Hot take. If you think the future is going to be a hellscape, you're doing your potential kids a favor by not having them.
We are a society that doesn't care very much about our children. We don't. We've decided, in large scale, at least according to our cultural arbiters, that kids are mainly useful so you can go on Instagram and virtue signal about how you're transing them.
What? Per Ben, lefties are the ones not having kids, and also lefties only find kids useful to parade them on Instagram because you're transing them. This is stupid, but if he thought he was right, given the conservative attitude about trans people, shouldn't he be happy then that lefties are less likely to have kids?
This is the thing that really, really matters, is how liberal you can make your kids or how you can screw up your kids, and then you can brag to your friends about how tolerant and diverse you are.
So basically, if your kid is liberal or not straight or anything outside the norm, Ben deems them screwed up. He has 3 or so kids himself, but apparently he needs to be told this. Parents do not make their children gay. They do not make their children trans. Their children simply are who they are, and it's the parents' job to be accepting of that and to help guide them into becoming responsible adults. It is not a parent's job to tell their kids who they are or who they're allowed to be.
Or alternatively, don't have kids at all, because the best life is the life that is lived without reference to time and the future.
What? Not having kids means you have no reference to time or the future? Has Ben also taken up drinking?
Countries such as the United States and Germany have been able to rely on robust immigration, even with relatively low birth rates, according to the New York Times. And of course, when you mention this, when you say, well, probably the United States, we should actually start having kids of our own.
Ben? When people immigrate, they become our own. Their kids become our own.
No, you're a racist. We should continue to import people from places where they have more kids.
Out of curiosity, when does someone no longer count as an immigrant? 1 generation? 2? It can't be never, because then Ben would never count anyone except Native Americans as our own, and we all know he's not about to do that. But even in families, it can get tricky. My dad's side of the family more or less all immigrated to the States in the 1800s, but my maternal grandmother didn't immigrate until 2018. So, am I an American? Half an American? Why does he care if it's immigrants having kids instead of whatever he considers true Americans? If he just wants more kids to be born in this country to save it, why does it matter? And if you've been lured here by Ben Shapiro's name and are about to type a comment about how awful immigrants are, you can save it. Immigrants do not cause more crime, and they are actually good for the economy in the long run.
That's a strategy, I suppose. The good news is that the Chinese government is fully aware of the problem, said Yang Kai, a sociologist at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. The bad news is there's very little they can do about it. So 2 decades ago, Australia tried a baby bonus program that paid the equivalent of nearly $6,000 a child at its peak. At the time the campaign started in 2004, the country's fertility rate was around 1.8 children per woman. By 2008, the rate had risen to a high of 2. By 2020, 6 years after the program ended, it was 1.6. So in other words, you can have sort of a temporary boost in birth, but what ends up happening is that you're actually front-loading the birth. What the studies tend to show is that when you pay people to have babies, then parents who are going to have 3 babies will have 3 babies, but they'll do it in a shorter time span in order to take advantage of the government money. But it's very difficult to convince somebody who doesn't want to have a baby that now they should have 2 babies because you're going to offer them money.
That makes sense. If you only want, say, 1 kid, you probably have your reasons beyond money, and a baby bonus will only go so far anyway. Would $6,000 even pay for a year of childcare in the U.S.?
John Bongard, demographer at the Population Council, says, you're not going to reverse the trend. If you throw in the kitchen sink and make childbearing more attractive, you may be able to prevent the population from falling off a cliff. Even the success of some of these efforts has had limits. No country has been able to reach a sustained return to a 2.1% replacement rate. The United States rate fell below 2.1 in 1970s and then slowly rose back toward the replacement rate by 2007 and then collapsed again after the Great Recession. Sweden has done the same thing. In 1980, they introduced what they called the speed premium, which was if you have babies within a certain amount of time, then you get a subsidy. It increased the population increase to about 2, the population growth rate. And then it started to decline again. Birth rate in Sweden fell throughout the 1990s. Over the last 50 years in Sweden, the fertility rate has fluctuated significantly, rising roughly in tandem with economic boons. You've seen the same thing in Hungary. Hungary has really incentivized childbearing through financial rewards. And what they've seen is a slight uptick in the number of kids by family. At the time that efforts began in Hungary by Viktor Orban in 2010, Hungary's fertility rate was just over 1.2. That was among the lowest in Europe. Over the 2010s, the rate climbed to around 1.6. It's unclear whether it's going to be able to sustain or whether it's going to dip off again.
I'm not really sure why Ben is telling us this, as I'm pretty sure we all know already, but I did look up Hungary's policies, and Well, non-married heterosexual couples and single women are also eligible for free IVF treatment, but not lesbians, meaning one half of a lesbian couple must pretend to be single and heterosexual if they wish to qualify. Well, that's really weird. What if a woman does pretend to be single and heterosexual, has a kid, and then it's discovered that she's dating a woman? That rule is so pointless. Also, it's a lot more complicated than have a baby, get money, or promise to have a baby, get money. I'm not really sure throwing money at the issue is what is going to solve it, but hey, I'm not a government official.
Now, what is the reason for all of this? Well, it's true that in every country, as countries get richer, people tend to have fewer kids. That is because traditionally, in societies that are poorer, people tend to see kids as economic assets, and as societies become richer, your kid becomes an economic burden. Just in pure econ terms, right? The amount of money that you're going to spend on the education and upbringing of your kid in a rich country tremendously outweighs the economic benefit of having a child. If you're in a very poor country, kids become labor very early. They become part of the family farm. They are sources of efficiencies. That does not hold true in richer countries.
Also, something called reliable birth control was invented. But otherwise, yes, and I do think it's a good thing that children are no longer put to work as soon as they can walk.
So you start to see birth rates decline. This happens literally everywhere. But there are certain cultures where people continue to have kids, even in developed countries, even in economically advanced countries. Which parts of those culture? You guessed it. The parts that take religion seriously.
Is he going to name these specific cultures?
Mormons are still having kids. Religious Catholics are still having kids. Orthodox Jews are still having kids. Religious Muslims are still having kids. Anyone who takes the injunction to have kids seriously on a moral level and recognizes that there is a generation beyond their own, that the height of human existence does not lie in taking a picture of yourself scuba diving and putting it on Instagram when you are 50 years old, the way that Chelsea Handler is.
Oh, so the cultures he was talking about are actually religious groups. I don't know why I thought he was going to tell us something we don't already know.
Any part of society that recognizes those fundamental truths is likely to continue growing. Any part that does not is likely to continue fading. Secularism, in other words, bears the seeds of its own destruction because it leads to societal sterility on a population level. And that is what you are seeing in the West. And so, if you wish to reverse this decline, then perhaps our society should stop on a cultural level, normalizing and championing child-free living as though it is an alternative good to choosing to have kids.
How is society championing child-free living? But yes, Ben, if someone doesn't want kids, it is better for everyone that they not have kids. Why do the Shapiros pretend like if you have a baby when you don't want one, everything will just fall into place and be fine?
It is better to have kids than not to have kids. That should not be a controversial statement. The fact that it is signals why our civilization is in a state of serious decline.
Hello? Why is it better to have kids than to not have kids? I was going to ask if that actually works, just state something is better than something else, but I look at the comments and no, Ben is getting pushback for this. I know he doesn't care, but I am relieved to see that most people believe if someone doesn't want kids, they shouldn't be forced into it. Well, who else is disappointed? I admit I'm an optimist. Whenever someone makes a declarative statement, I assume they have something to back it up. But really, you should not have kids to provide future taxpayers for the government. And to be honest, I think it's really strange that proponents of small government would even think that. And that is pretty much their only argument. They try the fulfillment angle, but you can't say other people will be fulfilled by having kids because other people are not you. Ben is a little older than me, so he should absolutely understand that by now. Different people will find different things fulfilling. Ben is fulfilled by having kids, Chelsea is fulfilled by traveling, I'm fulfilled by wandering through the woods. And other people would find nothing I just said fulfilling. The world is too big and people are too different to make a blanket statement about what will fulfill someone. And as for the religious imperative to have kids, that's someone's personal business and you can't make someone believe something just because you think it will be good for them. These videos are also a little weird to me because there's inevitably some crack about how it's the left that's not having kids, and they seem to be under the assumption that having kids is how you pass on your beliefs, be they political or religious. So shouldn't they be glad the left isn't having kids? I don't get it. I also don't get why this video was made, but it seems like every so often conservatives get upset that women aren't having kids like they used to, and so they have to whinge about it. In reality, if they actually cared, there's so much they could do to try and boost the birth rate if it's really that important to them. I'm just going to casually note that the US is the only OECD country without paid parental leave and without paid caregiving leave. But though lip service is paid to how important it is to have children, not only for personal fulfillment but also to society, somehow it's never important enough for policy changes. No, it's something individuals have to figure out, and so we do. And we don't have children. And that's it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I would like to give extra thanks to my patrons, and if you would like to help support the channel, my Patreon is linked below along with my socials. Liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing are also great ways to help support the channel if you would like to. Have a great day, night, whenever you happen to be watching this, and fade to cats.